And it's wonderful to have Callum back with us again from his many travels, and this time from Africa. Callum, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for calling me up and doing an interview again. It's good to see you, man.
It's always good fun. Always good fun having you on. And I do love your travelogues. And this one is Tourism in Zimbabwe, the Ruins of Rhodesia. And I know you've been on before. You did Afghanistan. You did Ukraine. Is this kind of the third big one or what?
I mean, I guess so. In my mind, they're all just different countries, but and they're all unique and special in their own ways. But I guess it's the third, let's say, dangerous one. Because I mean, Afghanistan was dangerous because ISIS were there, and the Taliban were trying to keep us safe from them. Of course, Russia or Ukraine or New Russia, depending on who you ask, that was dangerous because there's a war. Zimbabwe, that felt dangerous because you weren't really sure whether or not you might be going to prison for saying the wrong thing. Which I want to just talk about that real quick, because in Russia, you're thinking, okay, you have that problem too, right? In Afghanistan, you're obviously going to have that problem, right? And you think so. But in both of those countries, it's really clear that you know where the line is. In Afghanistan, you don't say anything bad about Islam. It's their country, it's their religion, simple as. In Russia, you don't talk shit about the war or the president. That's just not how they do things. You're not going to do that there. Okay, good. And with Zimbabwe, I read the law. The law said you can't criticize the president. Okay, that's normal for me. I can deal with that. I'm British. We deal with the same kind of bullshit. And so I thought, okay, fine. But then when you're in country and you're talking to all the different people, black or white, didn't matter. The biggest problem I had was trying to figure out how I can say this without getting anyone in trouble, but people
don't worry about that.
Well, people sort of live in fear in a way that you don't know where the line exactly is, and that causes more anxiety than you'd think. Because if people like certainty, and if there's a nice certainty, you can't say this, you can say that. Okay, that's still censorship, still we've got to deal with. That's fine. But when there's uncertainty and you don't know where the line is, I mean, it just causes anxiety and panic constantly in all interactions. I mean, we're seeing it now in England, obviously, with the police saying that if you've tweeted something which may have caused offense or stirred up hatred, which means whatever you want, they're going to come and arrest you. And if you retweeted something that caused offense or stirred up, they're also going to arrest you. So, I mean, I think we're slipping into that way in England as well, that you're not really sure where the line is. And that's worse. That's actually a lot worse, is what I've discovered, than knowing where the line is. And if you cross that, you're in big trouble. At least you can operate with that.
But
living in fear is...
In Zimbabwe, they had their own Freddo bars.
Yeah, true. There are pluses and minuses to many countries around the world, and that's why I do this. That's why I like it, finding out those little things.
Well, because I know in this one you were kind of struggling for some of those pluses. But again, this obviously, Britannica is the YouTube site. People can follow all of your interesting and varied travel experiences. But I mean, you started off this one maybe a little bit different from those. You started off by giving a history, and I'm kind of guessing because it's not something that's on people's radar and it's a little bit more complicated. But yeah, tell us about that, because the first maybe 10 minutes of it are in depth, giving a background, and that's quite different from what you've done before.
Sure. So I realized when I was editing the thing or putting everything in order, so I knew what to put in the video and what wasn't going to be interesting enough to stay in. Because you've only got an hour pretty much maximum, any more than that, and gets a bit dull, I find. So I think cutting it down is always a good idea. And I realized, right, a lot of this, like almost all of it, doesn't make any bloody sense if you don't know the history. Even just the rough history I was able to give in the time I had. And not a lot of people seem to know the history of Zimbabwe, the Rhodesian era especially, how everything went down there. So I thought, okay, I've definitely got to put a bit of a history section at the start. Bit worried because I wasn't sure how many normies would be able to deal with that in terms of, TikTok attention span and everything else. But I think I did all right. I sent it to a few different guys we met in country to check, look, is this vaguely okay? Have I got anything majorly wrong? And they're like, well, you've simplified a couple of things, but there's a reason why. So they were happy with it. And I think I'm hoping it did actually correlate. The people did pick up on why I did that. So, for example, King Mzilikazi being the leader of the Matabele, and the Matabele being the minority ethnic group in Zimbabwe. And the thing I found fascinating about that, because once you're reading about the history and experiencing the country and learning about it, is that Mzilikazi, he didn't turn up in Zimbabwe until like the 1800s. I mean, when the Boers were going on the Great Trek to escape the British into South Africa, they actually ran into Mzilikazi and his migrating tribe of Zulus who would become the Matabele, which just gives you a sense of how modern. And then they turn up in Zimbabwe and, well, they become the ruling people of Zimbabwe, which we then negotiated with through Cecil Rhodes and then conquered in the Matabele Wars. So if you didn't know that aspect, I think a lot of people reduce, especially African countries, down to native blacks and then evil white British people or French or whatever region you're dealing with. And obviously that's not reality anywhere at all. Racial lines are so low resolution. Seeing these are the Matabele, these are their history, here's the Boers, they're also white, but they got nothing to do with the British, except running away from them. And then here's the Shonas and everything else. If you don't understand that aspect, it just becomes impossible to understand anything else in Zimbabwe, is what I thought. So
hopefully
it worked.
No, I actually enjoyed it, and you generally do it so well anyway that it kind of moves through quite quickly, and you've got the background, and then you've got up to it being Rhodesia in effect, and that's probably the very end of the 1800s, like 1895 or just coming up to 1900, and people kind of see that, they hear it as Rhodesia, think it's British, and you talked about that kind of clash between the Rhodesians and what that means and the natives. I mean, maybe touch on that before we get into you arriving and your thoughts when you arrived.
Sure. So just before I go on, there is one bit I left out because it's so long ago and writing wasn't a thing in this place that it's hard to really know for sure. But the Shonas turned up about the same time as the Roman Empire was going on to this land. They basically, and everyone else, get rid of the Khoisan, who are the actual natives. They get kicked out of their land. And the Shonas set up the Zimbabwean, I think it's an empire, or Zimbabwean kingdom, whichever word you want to use. And that's where the great Zimbabwe ruins are that people used to go and visit in the old days, and still do. But that collapsed before the Matabele showed up, and then the Matabeles take over everyone. I wasn't able to get to the actual distinctions between them in terms of how they were treated before the Europeans showed up. So I saw this one TV series describing that whole series of history, and it seems the Matabeles, because they're descendants of the Zulus, I mean, they came here as Zulus, they just conquered the Shonas militarily in the sense of, you are going to work for us. I mean, the king, the Matabele king, used to call them slaves in the documentary, but basically anything before the British is so mired in myth and unreliable sources because there's no writing. So I thought, okay, I've got to start it from the British perspective. I am British as well, so why not do it like that? It makes sense. And therefore it also gives us a continuous history, because by the time we turned up, we just had the Matabeles in charge, and okay, we'll negotiate with you and then we'll conquer you by force because you rebel. And that's the start of Rhodesia, which does make sense for the modern actual country. As for the relations between the natives and the Rhodesians, it's difficult. So some of the black guys we were with, their parents had fought in the Liberation War against the Rhodesian state to liberate black people from not being able to vote for a leader so they could become Zimbabwe. And then the white people we met, they'd been in the Rhodesian Bush War. They were part of it. But I don't know. It's just everyone I ran into didn't seem to, when we discussed how were things like, I mean, it's hard to say, but how were things like between the blacks and the whites all throughout that time period? It just didn't seem that it was how people described it as I was growing up. I was expecting it to be actual hatred. Like, people think of white supremacists and they think of hating black people. American History X comes to mind, something like that, right? I I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, it definitely wasn't the case that it was some kind of multiracial kumbaya either, obviously. But one of the things that really struck me is the Europeans in Rhodesia in the 40s decided to build a monument to King Mzilikazi, the king of the Matabeles, which you don't really do. I mean, like, the Nazis don't do that for great Jews. I mean, that would just be mad, for example. So it definitely seemed that there was a level of mutual respect between the two, but the relationship was one of, from the white perspective, or the Rhodesian perspective, was, okay, but you guys aren't quite ready for taking over. You're kind of still quite low down on the tech tree. We need to, as they put it, they kept saying, we need responsible government, and therefore we need to train up some cohort of educated blacks to take over the civil service, and then these things will expand. As to whether or not you believe that that was the actual goal of Ian Smith is another question, but that's their point of view. And then from a lot of the black population, the position seemed to be that back then we realized we weren't going to get it, or didn't think we were going to get any kind of democratic rights through the process, and thought we could get a better life if we just overthrew the government through revolution. So that's what they used to think. As for these days, what's really funny is that the white population has just evaporated. They've just all left the country or died. I mean, what's left is incredibly old. There's some young people who are trying to get through life, and good luck to them. But if you go on different Zimbabwean groups on Facebook, that means you won't run into those white guys usually. You'll actually run into loads of black Zimbabweans of different ages. And think, independence was 44 years ago. So if you were born on Independence Day of Zimbabwe, you'd now be 44 years old. So you go into those groups, there's all these black guys. It's a real thing. You keep seeing black guys talk about, my God, I wish Ian Smith was back. My God, if Ian Smith was in charge, this wouldn't be happening, blah, 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 blah. And it reminds me of, like, you know, Zoomers in the West who keep posting about, like, oh, what if we brought back Catholic theocracy or some such thing, and they're not really Christians. It's a very weird phenomenon, but it definitely seems to be the case that no one really liked what happened in the end. They weren't pleased with how things played out. And
well, I mean, it is the obviously everyone has heard of Mugabe and saw the country collapsing, the white farmers kicked off, and people being put on the farms that couldn't farm anything, which, I mean, what can go wrong with that? But was there frustration or anger at that period, or have things improved? I mean, that seems to be a marker to the decline of Zimbabwe.
So it's a bit more complicated than I thought, because I thought it was very much a fast decline. From what I learned from people inside is that apparently when Mugabe came to power, Ian Smith met with him, and both of them had very strong positive opinions of each other. They actually thought, okay, we can make this work. The population were pretty happy with the settlement in terms of, you know, there's a little bit of unease to begin with the white population, but then the 80s were pretty good, is the consensus I found from everyone. The 90s also did all right. And then the thing that broke the camel's back is the corruption started entering into politics in those eras. So even though things were going pretty well, no massive seizures of property or anything like that, the economy wasn't being messed with, there was an opposition party to ZANU-PF. I should mention, we're kind of glossing over the genocide of the Nabeles, but whole other issue. So things were going pretty all right. The opposition party, I can't remember their name now, but the farmers decided to stop backing Mugabe and supporting his party and started backing the opposition and paying for them. And if you're Mugabe, okay, these white farmers have now backed the other party. They've got lots of money, lots of influence. Yeah, I mean, the right democratic thing to do is to let the democratic process play out, if you believe in that. But he didn't, and decided, screw it. The solution was to just deal with the white farmers as a political enemy. And the way to deal with them is to go with the narrative of, well, you are whites, you took this land from us, we will give it to war veterans, we'll take it by force if necessary, blah, blah, blah. And then it just collapsed the economy. So it's definitely... There's a lot of truth into the general thinking about Zimbabwe, but when you grind down into the specifics of what actually went on, it's always a bit more complicated than common history would have you tell.
Well, I'm sure Ian Smith was a great guy because he was a pilot. So any pilot is a good chap. So that's my thinking. So, hey, so look, you travel, you go there, you travel to Zimbabwe, and at least you went on an African airline that works, Ethiopian, because many of them are quite different. They may have wings, they may not, but you went on a decent airline, and you flew into Victoria Falls. You didn't go to Harare. I mean, what was that like planning, actually just going there?
Oh, a piece of piss, to be honest. Just go on Skyscanner, type in the flights, get some options. Done. I mean, it's not like Russia when you've got to deal with sanctions and a whole bunch of different websites don't work. It's fine. Turning up, you get visa on arrival. Probably the easiest place I've ever been to.
Was it a full flight, or there are many people going to Zimbabwe? It doesn't strike me as a big tourist destination.
It wasn't full. There was a decent number of people, though. I mean, a lot of Zimbos are going home for various reasons. There were some tourists. I mean, we went to Victoria Falls from Ethiopia, so we had to change flights. Victoria Falls is the big tourist destination for foreign tourists because the falls are so big and people love that. So there is actually a substantial tourist market. It's not unheard of for sure.
Was it your first time in Africa, or you're an African virgin?
African virgin, first time.
First time. Okay.
Yeah.
And last time? Because I've done Mali. I went to Mali for 2 weeks, and I thought, I don't know if my body could actually take that again. So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. I mean, it's more what is there to see. There was a guy who's invited me to Somaliland, that piece of Somalia that's declared independence.
Beautiful.
Liberia's interesting.
Yeah.
Apart from that, I mean, I want to go back to South Africa, but apart from that, I just don't know what's there to see that would interest me.
I would like Madagascar. Could you do Madagascar?
It's not really Africa, though, is it? It's more Polynesia in a way.
It is, but it's kind of it is on. But to me, that's something that's actually quite diverse and different. But you're right. The Africa itself, there aren't many things on my to-do list actually that make me want to go there. So no, but you're right.
But that was the reason I went to Zimbabwe. I mean, there's just so much there. I mean, going through the British colonial era, and they weren't just some outpost that 100 white civil servants and 20 British bobbies ran for about 5 years. I mean, most African colonies are like that. It's very small white population, basically just run the administration, keep the peace, extract some resources, and that's about it. We can color a bit more of the map pink. Rhodesia was a place that, because of roads, people actually tried to settle the land. They tried to build something. And then when decolonization came along, it goes all the way down the continent until it hits them. And they just refused, which, I mean, I don't think we can understate how unique that is, because no one else did it. I mean, they just went to hell with you, declared independence, and then fought a war for 10 years. We actually got to see what would the other path have been. I mean, if we hadn't gone down the route of decolonization because the Americans wanted us to do that, what would have these states exactly look like? And that's somewhat of a portal into a different universe in a way. So that's why it's just fascinating.
Right, let's pick up some things. Food, you went to supermarket, which you thought was actually okay. It did seem to be fairly well stocked. What was that like? Kind of just getting around food, how you shop, kind of what was that like?
Yeah, there's not the kind of things we have in our supermarkets. Like you couldn't find a meal deal for your life. Because we were trying to find snacks, because I didn't want to go out to restaurants because it's African prices, but still, I don't like spending money. So I wanted to get something like that, and you just can't. I mean, the closest you can get is dried biscuits and potato chips. There is like a bakery section, but it's not very amazing. In those provinces, once you get to the capital, there's far more stuff there. Still couldn't find sandwiches, actually, but you can find lots more cakes and whatnot. But it'll do. There's nothing wrong with it. Plenty of food, which is, not always a given, and long soap, which
I saw that.
it's not a bad idea. I mean, why not buy a massive bar of soap, cut it up into pieces, save some money?
Yes, that is. Did you bring one back with you?
No, it's not cost effective.
Okay.
It's better to just buy some soap here.
Your hand luggage full of long soap, so it didn't work. What about the currency? It was intriguing. You talked about the different how you use currencies and not being able to get the currency, and then dollar, and of course the stories we hear of the Zimbabwean currency going from nothing to trillions or whatever. Tell us kind of about that and how it worked when you're over there.
Sure. So a bit of the history is that apparently one Zimbabwe dollar back during 80s and 90s would buy you $2. Well, the currency was incredibly strong. And then I've got some here. It looked like this. That's a $5 note. Nice fiver. And then it turns into nonsense like 100,000. And then, as you've mentioned, pretty soon you're ending up with 20 billion. But you're not carrying around a 20 billion. You're carrying around like stacks. And that's worth like 5 pence. And it's just a mess. And the reason for that is actually unclear. You would think it is simple because the common thinking is just, wow, what a bunch of idiots. But this didn't just happen in Zimbabwe. It's the worst it's ever been in Zimbabwe. But Germany went through the same thing in Weimar. The Venezuelans have gone through this. The Turks have gone through it. Hungary, plenty of people have gone through massive hyperinflation that just destroys the currency. So why would you do it? Because for a long time I was just thinking, what a bunch of fools. And I ran into a guy at a British South Africa police meeting, and he said he used to work in the central bank and then left Zimbabwe.
A British South Africa police meeting. Okay, I'll come back to that.
Yeah, so the British South Africa police used to be the police of Rhodesia, even when it was an independent state. And a bunch of them have fled, and they've gone all over the world. And loads of them live in the UK, and they like to have these little meetups 3 times a year. Great guys. So I managed to meet one. He said, oh, do you want to come down and have a look? So we met a whole bunch of them. They're great guys. I mean, they're all like, 70, 80-year-old guys meeting old friends. But it's still, British South Africa police meetup in England is nice. One of them used to work in the central bank. He actually gave me a 1 cent note because they started printing those. I mean, what kind of country prints a 1 cent note? It's just, it sounds like just pure madness. Like they actually were sniffing crayons or something. And he told me, no. Like this is complete nonsense to believe that the people in charge are all drugged up. Instead, the situation, in his point of view, was they knew the currency was going to pop. 2008, world financial crisis, everyone is screwed. What can we do to try and prop up what we're doing? Because also we're facing a food crisis because of what's happened with the white farmers. So I think they went through 7 currencies in that time period. Because think about it. Okay, we're printing these Zimbabwe dollars. Currently, you can go buy, if you've got a few million of them, you can go buy some cars, houses, whatever. So let's take on loads of debt. Let's buy loads of stuff. And then we'll just print loads of Zimbabwe dollars, which just inflates away the debt. Because if your inflation rate is 1,000% and you've got a massive amount of debt, well, that debt's now worth nothing. Screws over the guy who lent you the money, but screw him. We need cash now. Do it 7 times in a row. Like once you're printing the millions, send the boys out with the $1 million notes, get everything they can. And then when the currency becomes worthless again, you've got massive debt. Print the $1 billion notes, do it again. And once that happened, do the $1 trillion notes. Cycle repeats. I don't know if this is true, but this guy has seemingly been through the central bank. He had the credentials for it. Tells me the story. And after hearing it, I'm thinking to myself, okay, yeah. One of the things I found from the Rhodesians when I was there is if you had loads of money in the bank, if you had a big pension or savings, obviously you were screwed. It was just worthless overnight. But the fellas who did the risky thing of turning 20 and start flipping houses and just taking on millions of dollars worth of debt to own 20 properties and you're doing them up, but trust me, the house price will increase. And that's the way you do things in like the US for a lot of people. Those guys, it was payday. I mean, they had like, $50 million worth of debt. And overnight it was $0 worth of debt. And they got to keep all the houses. That was brilliant. Now imagine you're the central bank. Think of the power you've got because you're the one who can print it.
It sounds like broken economics.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you'd country ruin yourself in a way that's so bad they've still never got back to a currency that isn't US dollars. But it makes a hell of a lot more sense as a story than everyone was sniffing glue and thought $1 trillion notes were sensible. Obviously, they didn't. That's just mad.
What has the country improved at all? What was your conversations with people? Did you have conversations with people who remembered kind of the good old days when they had something, or has the country improved anything?
So I met young guys and old guys. The old guys obviously were reminiscing about the past. I've seen the footage. It was better. It's not negotiable. It's video evidence. And that's when it was Zimbabwe and when it was Rhodesia. It's not about which government was in charge. Even, as I mentioned, the 80s, 90s, things were pretty good. As for the young guys, I mean, they don't know a different time. Things definitely are getting better than they were in 2008, for sure. I mean, there's no more bread lines. You can get food. Anyone who thinks they're just going to live off government handouts doesn't exist anymore. They either, presumably starved to death or got a job. You'll find as you're driving, just people standing with watermelons and pineapples, toilet paper, and they'll come up to your car and offer you, "Do you want to buy some toilet paper?" And you're like, "No, I've just been, thanks." But those guys aren't begging. They'll come up to you and be a bit annoying to try and sell you something, but they're entrepreneurs. I mean, that's the cash they've got in the bank, is that toilet paper. And if they sell you it, they've made a profit. They can go buy more toilet paper, and the profit they can eat tonight. So everyone's an entrepreneur. So definitely the spirit of the people is I would say that's a much better spirit to have than anything else. So that's an improvement. The new president has cleaned up some stuff, for sure. There used to be checkpoints all over the place that were just, the police wanted money, so they would do you for speeding, even though you weren't. They would do you for not paying the radio license.
Yeah, the radio license.
They would do you for one of your headlights is out, bash, whatever, to get money out of you. That's all cleaned up. That's gone. I mean, we drove the entire length of the country, didn't interact with that once. And apparently the new president is the one who solved that. So that's great news. If he can keep doing things like that, I mean, genuinely, Zimbabwe could be heaven on earth. Like, the land is absolutely fantastic real estate. Wonderful location. You get these nice hot days, but it's not humid like the UK, so it's actually more comfortable to be in heat there than it is here, for example. Absolutely fantastic wildlife. Amazing potential for hunting, especially for hunting elephants. That's a whole other debate, but they've got way too many elephants, need Americans to come hunt them. And if they can get that sorted, and for you to get your elephant head back home, that would be brilliant for them. And there's just so much there. And never mind with the history and everything else. I mean, what you can sell people in terms of memorabilia. I mean, I told the ZANU-PF guy, actually, well, why not just set up a little stand and sell Rhodesian flags, which for him might have sounded a bit bad coming from some white guys. Like, why don't you just sell Rhodesian stuff? But he could see, when I was laying it out to him, he could see the cogs turning. I was like, yeah, no, that's actually going to make money. It's not a threat to the government because Rhodesia isn't coming back. That's a mental position to think. It's Zimbabwe now. It will be for the rest of time. So why not just make some cash off some tourism? People want to come see Rhodesian stuff. If they want to come see old British stuff, why not? There's so much opportunity to that. It just needs some incremental change and stability. And honestly, I wish them luck. I mean, there was some leftists found the video recently, and they're all retweeting it to say, look at this guy celebrating Rhodesia, who loves white supremacy, blah, 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 blah. And everyone's just laughing at them in the comments because it's so obvious they haven't watched the video. Because when you go and watch the video, it's like, no, we're seeing the ruins of Rhodesia. As I say, it's gone. Anyone thinking about bringing it back, that's just stupid. So here's what was, here's what is now, here's what's changed, here's what's better, here's what's worse. That's how it is. And I mean, again, I'm not really too sure what I can say without getting someone in trouble, but it's definitely the case that there's a unity amongst everyone now in that country, that what was tried under Mugabe didn't work. I mean, everyone's agreed that was a failure now. That's why we had to coup him and get rid of him, even from the party's perspective, why they had to get rid of him. So we've got to try a new way. And if ZANU can find it, that would be great. If they fail, I'm sure the opposition will do their thing. But I just hope they can get through it without any nonsense. Because I'd love to go back and see it be better.
Because many, I mean, the church I go to in London, Black majority church, and get to talk to a lot of people from many African countries, and you realize a lot of African countries are tribal, and they're not actually countries because often it's the Brits that put the countries together. But what did you say? You talk about unity. Does that mean there is not that kind of tribal tension in the country? Did they come under the Zimbabwe umbrella, or did you not kind of have those conversations?
So there's two groups. I mean, the whites are largely just a complete irrelevancy now, but there's two groups. So there's the Matabeles and there's the Shonas. The Shonas were Robert Mugabe's guys during the Liberation War. Matabeles were Joshua Nkomo's. And once they got independence, Mugabe didn't like sharing with Nkomo. I don't know what their specific problem was. My only guess is that back in the day, the Matabeles, when they were in charge before the British, weren't too nice to the Shonas, and that's built up a lot of resentment. If there's any Shonas or Matabeles watching, let me know. So that ended up with the Nabeles getting completely relegated from society. The genocide took place to try and get rid of them. ZANU-PF was formed to merge the two political wings of those different tribes. So it became Patriotic Front, just one front. They've apologized for this. I think Robert Mugabe's government, or the new one, they've issued an apology for the genocide and everything else. So it's not taboo to mention it. It's history.
It's like, oops, we killed everyone.
Yeah, and they're trying to move past that. When you interact with the people, I mean, there's a lot of people who are intermarried between Shonas and Nabeles. Some of the guys we met were half and half. Okay. But it's not a question of conflict between the two. It's now pretty much everyone doesn't care about that. They're interesting because the languages are different, so they're not going to get rid of that. That's just how it is. But there's not seemingly like proper racial division or ethnic conflict between the two in the form of the people. As when it gets to politics, again, trying to be careful what I can say, but I'm not convinced that everything's smooth sailing, because Harare being the capital, it's pretty normal for the capital to have more investment, right? That makes sense. But Harare seems to have everything that's new, like every new building, it's much bigger, everything's centered around their infrastructure. You go to Matabele land, so Bulawayo is the biggest city in the Matabele area, and you can tell it's just sort of been forgotten to time, which was great for me because I wanted to go and see old British stuff. And with the history there, it's fantastic. But looking around, and there's like a few offices that are new, maybe some gas stations. It's not exactly a modern hub of commerce. So maybe I'm ignorant, but it really looks like they're still not getting the kind of investment that they could use.
Well, it's not much different from the UK. The money goes to London, but then there is a bit elsewhere. How did you get around? Did you use their new high-speed network, or how did you get around? High-speed train link? No? HSN?
Yeah, the bullet trains are great. You just hop on and off. Yeah, people who don't know, that there's not much. You can fly around the country. That's the best way to get around if you want to save time.
On what airline? Duck Tip Airline.
They've got their own.
Yeah, right.
Look, you should go work for them. You make some money.
Never.
Yeah. But so they've got that. You can use it. But I wanted to see the country, and obviously you don't really see it flying around. So we drove. The roads are bad to non-existent in some areas. Scratch that in a lot of areas, even when you paid a toll. So that sucks. I mean,
so
you'll be driving
a motorway from Virginia Falls to Harare. Is that what you're saying?
Sadly not. I mean, there is a road between Bulawayo and Harare, the two big cities, the only real actual cities in the country. And that road is a toll road, and there is paved road the whole way, which you wouldn't think would be that big of a deal, but it is, and it's pretty good. So that's good. But for Victoria Falls to Bulawayo, it was awful. And in which case, I mean, you just wish they would get that sorted. There's a lot more Chinese investment there. I mean, one of the roads we drove on, it had been ripped up because it was being resurfaced because there was a Chinese coal power plant that had just been built. And presumably part of the deal is the Chinese pay for redoing the roads. If that's the way it gets done, I mean, if you're the guys in charge of Zimbabwe, that's the reason they're accepting so much Chinese investment, is who else is really in the game anymore. And in a place like that, I mean, we sat down with a guy from ZANU, and he was basically spending the entire lunchtime telling us, you should set up a farm here. You should invest in textiles or production or mining. Mining, you should definitely invest in mining. And he's giving us all these different speeches about how you can double your money within a year or 5 years. Very optimistic, but the thing that was revealing is that they are desperate, in a sense, for getting the Westerners back, which is kind of funny for a lot of people. People might be smirking and saying, haha, you dealt with the Chinese, you get what you deserve. But, I mean, these guys, like the Taliban taking over in Afghanistan now, their main partner for most things is the Chinese. But what I've got out of Miles is that the Taliban government aren't really too keen on that, because they've seen what's happened to other countries, Zimbabwe being one, where they've signed up with the Chinese. The Chinese are going to do this, they're going to do that. Okay, great, here's the deal, we sign it. And then the Chinese just skimp on everything. And if they can rip you off, they will. There's no solidarity or brotherhood between these people. And so, yeah, the Westerners might have strings attached, and that's annoying. But they were better at being trade partners. So, again, this is a bit of a difficult one, because I'm trying to be careful with what I've said, because
with lots of African countries, it's the Chinese that have gone in with the cash and they're taking over large parts of countries by setting up new infrastructure after many African countries have destroyed anything. I mean, I remember talking to lots of people in Mozambique, and they just completely destroyed all the Portuguese built and just razed to the ground. And you get other countries in Africa have destroyed everything the Belgians built or the Brits built. And the Chinese seem to be rebuilding that, but then that gives them full control. So it's new colonization, I guess, but just the Chinese this time.
Sure. And that's one of the words that a lot of people were angry about. Is like, how dare you go with not a lot of people. There were like 3 left-wing white people who were angry about that. I went there with a red coat. The Zimbabweans loved it. They thought it was hilarious. So, don't get it twisted that they disliked it. They were like, okay, yeah, funny, British thing. Then they don't see it as some form of colonization. But you would think about the old colonization era and the damage it did. But if you're going to trade that for being colonized by the Chinese, okay, then we can compare the two, can't we? What does Chinese colonization look like versus what the British did? That's not a difficult thought experiment. I mean, the Zimbabwean one, again, because it's a place the English tried to settle, the mass immigrations try and build a population there. It's the one everyone points to, because when people turned up, the pioneers turned up, the wheel hadn't been invented. And by the time Zimbabwe got independence as a black majority country, they had jet planes.
Yeah.
I mean, just a leap in technology that's unbelievable. Okay. And there's that video from the Congo everyone's seen where this Chinese guy talks down to the Congolese saying, you guys had railroads and all this stuff in the 50s. We didn't even have that in China. And now look at us now. You've destroyed all your railroads and we've gone into the space age in China. So you can't blame colonization, because we were worse off than you were in the 50s. And now the Chinese are turning up. And I don't think they're going to leave the country much better off. I mean, they're just there to make a profit. I mean, it is very, very capitalistic of them that they're just turning up, want to extract what they can. If they, I mean, let me put this some specifics on this. So they built a stadium. It's a very big thing. Massive football stadium. They were told to build it somewhere else because that's where people actually lived and they could come and play in the stadium. They said, no, put it somewhere where no one lives, so no one uses it. You go in there after they've built the thing. Trust me, go in, have a look. There's no seats. We want seats, said the Zimbabweans, and the Chinese said, well, you've got to pay for the seats. They're extra. Okay. Also, there's no toilets in our big stadium you've just built. Yeah, the toilets are extra too. Yeah, pricks. I mean, you can see why the business relationship very quickly becomes thanks for that, because we paid you to build this thing, and you've just tried to screw us over at every point. I mean, one of the other things the Zano guy mentioned is they'll buy a gold mine, and the gold mine's worth, let's say, $1 billion, and they'll offer you 10 million. And the Zimbabweans are left in the room looking at him like, no, like, you taking the piss. That's not even an opening bid. That's just you're being a prick to think that we would offer you that little, that we would get that little in return. So yeah, I don't have high hopes for the Chinese colonization of Africa in terms of helping the Africans. And they would be better off with Westerners if we could help them, and it'd be profitable for us as well. Maybe that's a good option, but I don't see the West being sensible anytime soon.
Yeah, welcome to negotiating with the Chinese, the whole new world. But on the transport, I was expecting, I mean, you were enjoying your trains. I was expecting you to get a Michael Portillo pink jacket and get out your Bradshaw guide. I thought you were going to do full on. No.
The trains don't move.
Well, I know it was an eerie video you had of going up the train and it's just abandoned. They're all sitting there abandoned. Or they're trained, but you did show some, like there was a steam train that actually did seem to work. Or are there trains that move around the country, or are they just abandoned on side tracks?
So that steam train seems to have been a tourist thing, and it was going back to Zambia. So I'm not sure if it's run by the Zimbabweans or not, but it's a very unique circumstance, that one. We did see some cargo trains, like 2, and the whole time in the country of several weeks driving around. But yeah, the reality is most trains are gone. I mean, just the technology is just... Imagine you're playing a video game and suddenly you get a message that the technology to build trains has disappeared. You'd be confused. Like, what are you talking about? And passenger trains, yeah, they've just disappeared off the face of the earth. They don't seem to run. Too bad. That's not an option anymore. All it needs is a little bit of upkeep to keep that going. I mean, it's not advanced technology. We're dealing with railways and carriages and engines that at the most advanced are like 1960s and go back to steam trains that are still running there. It's such simple tech, and it's you would think building even just a train factory in Zimbabwe would be a great idea, and then you could keep it all running and sell it to other African nations. And simple thought, why not have your rail network still work? I mean, why is that something that's complicated? But there we go, it's gone. And what was funny is after Zimbabwe, I went to South Africa, and the guy who's driving me around, he's Afrikaans, and he's born and raised in South Africa, his family, and obviously through the apartheid state, and then afterwards. He's driving around, and the decline they've gone on is also interesting. And he turns to me and says, one of the funny games I play with my wife is Spot a Train. We've been playing it for 10 years. I haven't found one yet.
In South Africa?
Yeah. She turned to him one day and said, honey, when was the last time you saw a train? And he realized he hadn't. And they realized the last time they saw one, they figured it out. And then they've been playing Spot the Train ever since. Still never won. And you think, okay, that's...
Maybe
that's
they'll get Chinese maglev trains.
Well, it's just so depressing that that's how far things can collapse.
Yeah.
And even when you've lost the technology of trains, you're not actually at rock bottom yet. It could get way worse. It's just a constant reminder that there is no guarantee, zero, none. I mean, it's a fucking miracle that things actually progress, because there is no guarantee that they should progress. If all things are left to their devices, they will decline year upon year. And being in Britain, I mean, we're experiencing this since 2008. Things have just declined in pure economic terms. Before we get to any other discussion, you can measure it. We're just worse off than we were as a population. And then you look at that and you think, okay, if things continue as they are where you live in terms of stagnation or declining, you will end up with no trains. You will end up playing Spot the Train.
Wow. Tell me what it was like going in the capital, Harare or Salisbury, as it was, apart from getting a KFC. What was that like? What were your thoughts, or was it just you were glad to get into some civilization?
Yeah, okay. I'm a country boy. I prefer the countryside, even in Africa. I think those people were
Really?
I think those people are having a better quality of life in a way.
Yeah.
You get to the capital and it's... The population's massively increased. Under Rhodesia, the black population massively boomed. Now Zimbabwe, population's massively boomed. As a result, there's loads of people. There's a some section of middle to upper class. They've all got cars, multiple cars, some of them. And there's no more roads. Road number hasn't increased, so there's just massive traffic. African chaos in terms of enforcement of driving standards. So that's scary. And then when you're in the city, So everywhere else we've been, countryside, you've got people living in mud huts. You go to Bulawayo and you've got ancient British buildings, which are basically the standard there, and a couple of new ones, that's it. And then just outside the city, mud huts. You get to Harare, you've entered civilization again in terms of modern stuff, but I wouldn't describe it as civilization as I'd be happier to live there than the countryside. I thought the countryside was better because once you get there, you're seeing all these modern buildings for the skyscrapers in terms of offices. Okay, they exist. And then there's bars on the entrances on all of the bottom floors. That's normal. We arrived at night and very quickly noticed there's no street lights. Oh no, they are, but they're not turned on. Okay. And then you start driving to where you're going to stay, which we stayed with some roadies, and they live out in the suburb area. And the suburb area is like, oh, we're back to civilization now. You actually feel it. Okay, there's houses, there's armed security, there's these big walls covered in razor wire and whatnot, but everyone's got cars, nice shops, blah, blah, blah. And we went out and toured all those areas. We saw how the richest live there, and there's some massive mansions, lovely grass, well kept, lovely decorations on all the walls, razor wire, etc. Security everywhere, great cars, real Mercedes and Rolls Royce and everything else. And our Rhodesian hosts were like, you really need to go see reality. So then you drive into the city, and there's the other sections where it's just miserable. You've got this place called Mbari we went to, and it has these buildings that were apparently built to house the black population. It was a segregated society, so this was a black district where only blacks were allowed to live during Rhodesia. You go there, and there's the buildings that they used to be housed in. These days, massively bigger population. They've just become these slums where there's dirt everywhere. The floor is made out of mud and sewage. And there's just shack upon shack upon shack, which people are using as their business. And even the shacks, I mean, the shacks are covered in like chicken wire and nailed down so people don't steal them. When you're worried about people stealing your shack. Right. And I'm looking at my phone about information. It's like, right, this is the area where there's all cholera and polio is returned. What's that movie with the prawns in South Africa? Is it District 9?
Could be District 9, yeah.
And they show off this place, and it's all these aliens have turned up, and it's just turned into an absolute slum. And it's the slum doesn't do the place justice. That word doesn't do it justice. It's worse than you think. And you look at it, and you think, oh, no one's got a chance in hell here. If you're born there, I mean, we're back to the Victorian era, which I mean may not be the worst thing in the world. I mean, the Stone Age is still quite a way to go from the Victorian slums, but still, you don't want to see Victorian style slums, even in a place like that. That's what I mean. That you see these big modern buildings, you see these big rich houses, and then you see those right next door, and you think, I can't describe that as civilization. That's miserable.
Is there any economy? I mean, you talked about people selling toilet roll and things and trying to make do with what they are at that level of entrepreneurship, which I guess is forced upon you because you need to live. Is there some kind of economy? I mean, what do kids, if they go to school or whatever, if there is one, is there kind of jobs they go into, or how does that work out?
Yeah, so I mean, there are plenty of schools. What's funny is that so this guy we're working with, who was a policeman, and he's bragging about the school his kids go to. And the way he bragged about it is it used to be an all-white school, no blacks allowed. He's like, yeah, my son is in there. It's a good one. Okay, mate. And you keep seeing that advertised. So we drove past a couple of schools, and the advertisements, when you see a school advertised, it's all kids playing with whatever and fancy, they've got computers, stuff like that. All the kids were white.
In the middle of Africa.
In the fancy school advertising posters.
Wow.
Because you see all the other advertisements and everyone is black. I know in the West we have this weird mess up where population's white, everyone in the advertisements are black, and it's because people in advertising are all weird ideologues. But in Africa it's normal, like we just hire the population, they star in the adverts, all very simple, normal life. And then you drive past a really fancy school and all of the kids in the advertisements are white, so that the rich black families will send their kids there. Okay, so that's that. They have got a schooling system. It's very expensive for the good ones, and that's how that works, is that they're still advertising on that basis. And when they grow up, you're very quickly going to learn that you need to make money. That's how the world works. And everyone seemed to have 2 or 3 trades. So the guy who was driving us, he's a tour guide, he's a professional driver. He's also a mechanic. He fixes cars. He's also an air conditioning install man. Like he goes around fixing air conditionings and whatnot. And when one of his jobs, like he'll be a mechanic for a couple of years and it'll go bust, fine, I'll go fix air conditioning units. There's always a backup. So the people in that regard, again, are just phenomenal. Like you meet these guys and they're just so talented. And it's not skilled in bullshit that you get from a university. I mean, they're proper talented. They can fix everything in their life. So that's, again, fantastic. Then you've got the entrepreneurs who are trying to make money doing that. But one statistic I heard and then checked, and it's true, apparently, is that 95% of the population are unemployed. And wow. That sounds horrific. And it is horrific until you realize what that precisely means. So they're not in employment, meaning there's not a company or a government department that's got them on a payroll every month. They're just working job to job, gig to gig. So it's like 95% gig economy, pretty much. A lot of them are also farmers, and they just live off basically what they farm. A little bit of surplus if it's a good year, make a little bit of money. But yeah, when you ask, is there an economy? Yes. What it is, I'm not quite sure. They do export a lot of minerals. Like the mining industry is the big thing over there. I met a guy who said an Englishman came with 40 grand in his pocket, and within 5 years he'd become a multimillionaire. So, I mean, there is opportunity in that sense, but beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I really, really don't know. I mean, they all just seem to be getting by and surviving, which good luck to them. I mean, they're not shirking. They are actually working to get their money.
Well, just as I won't be rushing to Afghanistan or I won't be rushing to Ukraine frontline, Zimbabwe is probably not on my list. Callum, there are lots of other great things in videos, how they fix their roads with sand and the Umedian African witch and the goblins. I'll leave that for the viewers to go and check out. Might be the first witch that Callum has met, so check that out. And the ZANU PF headquarters, having dinner there. They're all little parts to it that I certainly enjoyed, and you always do quirky videos. So thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else that people need to look out for watching it, or will we leave it with that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'll mention I got all these notes. So the way I make money, because these things do need funding right now, is that if you sign up to my Subscribe Star, so if you look up Subscribe Star Callum and subscribe to any of the tiers, send me a DM on there and I will send you millions or billions of dollars, whichever I have in stock. So that's how I'm funding it.
Okay.
I'll mention one more thing.
Yeah.
I think I'm allowed to mention this. There were some people who thought that I'd gone there to just, again, show off Rhodesia or glorify that. And it wasn't. It was to visit Zimbabwe, see what there is. And obviously Rhodesia is a massive part of their history and it's interesting. But you get to the country, you see what it is, you've got to tell the truth. Here's the good stuff, here's the bad stuff. And I'd love to go back. I mean, you say it's not on your list. That's fine. You don't have to, of course. But if someone wants to go and see some fantastic wildlife, if you want to see somewhere that's super interesting because of its history, and if you love British ruins or you're interested in Rhodesia or Zimbabwe, it's definitely worth a visit. I mean, this is one of the few countries I've actually ended the video with saying, yeah, go for it. If you want to go, it's a pretty easy one. Just try and follow the rules. And I know that's going to be difficult because nobody knows what they are.
DM Callum and he will fill you in all those. But yeah, subscribestar.com/Callum. We'll put that in the link. You can click on one of those subscription tiers. And of course, that means that you can keep selling Callum to the end of nowhere and he could make videos and hopefully come back alive. At least buy some Freddos going out there. But Callum, as always, love you coming on. Britannica is the YouTube channel and /Callum on Subscribestar. So thanks so much for joining us today and giving us your thoughts on your Zimbabwe trip.
Thanks for having me.